Sophie Cunningham isn't just another name you scroll past in a box score. She's not just filling minutes, not just clocking in and out of games like a role player. She's something else entirely. She's that spark, that sudden jolt of electricity that makes a whole arena sit forward in their seats. And whether you're a fan who loves her swagger or a critic who can't stand her style, there's one truth you can't escape. You notice her. Everyone does. Teammates, opponents, coaches, even the stars of the league. Sophie Cunningham doesn't blend in. She tilts the game every single time she steps on the court. And here's the thing. In the WNBA right now, where talent is everywhere and stars are shining brighter than ever, it's rare to find a player who can dominate the conversation without dominating the scoring column. But Sophie does exactly that. She's part agitator, part protector, part chaos, and part glue. She's the wild card that forces everybody, teammates and opponents alike, to adjust the second she checks in. And if you stay with me, you'll see why players, coaches, and even Caitlain Clark herself have all had something to say about Sophie Cunningham. There's a moment in every single game when the air shifts. The noise of the crowd rises, the physicality ramps up, and suddenly every possession feels heavier. For Indiana, that moment often arrives the second Sophie Cunningham checks in. She doesn't need a play called for her. She doesn't need the ball in her hands. She just exists in the game, and the atmosphere changes. The buzz in the crowd sharpens, defenders start second-guessing, screens get set a little harder, and the entire pace jumps by a few beats. Ask players around the league, and you'll hear two different stories at once. Teammates talk about her as an X factor, the one who brings energy and intensity every night. Opponents, they'll tell you she's a handful, a player who drags you into the mud and refuses to let you climb out. Either way, when Sophie's on the court, you're playing at her temperature, not yours. And she loves it that way. She lives in the chaos, in that in-between space where the game feels like it could tilt at any second. And trust me, she's tilting it. Now, here's the thing about Sophie. You can measure points, you can measure rebounds, you can track assists, but how do you score presence? How do you track that suffocating pressure she applies every second she's on the floor? That's where her value lies. In the invisible plays that rarely make the highlight reel, but absolutely win games. Think about it. She stunts toward a driver just long enough to force a kickout. She bodies up a shooter so that a clean pin down turns into a wrestling match. She veers off her assignment to protect a teammate, then still makes it back to close out her own check. None of it shows up in the box score, but all of it stacks up into the kind of possessions that flip momentum before it even starts. It's exhausting, it's relentless, and it's exactly the kind of work that separates teams in crunch time. Kelsey Mitchell, one of Indiana's primary scorers, didn't bother sugarcoating it. She just said the quiet part out loud. Sophie's that wild card, man. She talked about Sophie and Lexi Hall together, about how their energy changes everything, especially on defense. That's not a bench warmer talking. That's a leading scorer admitting the bench is a weapon because of Sophie's fire. And notice where Kelsey's praise went first. Not shooting, not scoring. Defense, energy, the willingness to just figure it out no matter what. That's trust. That's belief. And when it comes from one of the best scorers in the league, it lands differently. But teammates aren't the only ones saying it. When coaches start echoing the same message, you know it's more than just locker room talk. If players set the tone, coaches set the terms. And when Indiana's staff talks about Sophie, they don't dress it up. Coach Nate Tibbetts kept it simple: toughness and grit. He said Sophie embraces the work, the role, the grind. She competes every single night, and she does it without complaint. That's not highlight praise. It's the coaching equivalent of a stamp of approval. And then you've got Stephanie White, who didn't mince words either. Oh my God, Sophie's a dog. She just is. She's versatile. She raises the level of everyone around her. Dog, competitor, X factor. Those aren't throwaway words. Those are signals that your presence changes the game plan, that your coach trusts you to tilt matchups, to give starters rest without losing momentum, to turn average possessions into contested battles. In basketball, coaches don't hand out that kind of praise lightly. Sophie's earned it. Every bruise, every hustle play, every screen she sets, it's all built into the trust that buys her real minutes on the floor. But here's where things get even more interesting, because it's not just teammates and coaches noticing Sophie Cunningham. Stars around the league are weighing in too, including Caitlain Clark.
Let's be honest. The WNBA spotlight right now burns brightest on Caitlain Clark. She's the phenom, the rising face of the league, the rookie every camera follows. But even Caitlain couldn't help but notice Sophie Cunningham. Instead of dodging the comparisons or stirring up drama, Caitlain responded with a line that had everybody talking. If someone had Sophie's looks and my game, that'd be the most famous player this league's ever seen. The room laughed, but the respect behind the words was clear. Caitlain wasn't just making a joke, she was tipping her hat to Sophie. Because off the court, their connection is real. On the floor, they battle. Off it, there's a bond forming that fans are starting to notice. And trust me, that quote wasn't the end of it. There's more between Caitlain and Sophie than a single headline. But hold that thought, because before we circle back, you need to see what happens when Sophie's energy collides with a star who simply refuses to blink. Sophie's game is designed to affect you, to make you feel her pressure, her contact, her voice in every possession. But what happens when that fire runs into someone who treats chaos like background noise? That's where Paige Buckers enters the story. When asked about Sophie's intensity, Paige didn't escalate. She didn't throw shade. She just reframed the entire situation with pure composure. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions. I can't control the whistle, but I can control how I respond. I choose to be unaffected. That's veteran poise coming from a rookie. Calm versus chaos. Composure versus pressure. Paige wasn't denying Sophie's edge. She was absorbing it, neutralizing it, refusing to blink. And in that moment, you could see the exact reason Sophie is polarizing. Some players flinch under her style, others stare it down. Either way, she forces you to make a choice. But the conversation around Sophie isn't just about gameplay. It's about culture too. And that's where things get even hotter. The WNBA is more than basketball. It's also culture, politics, and community. And Sophie's name has been at the center of that storm too. When negativity started popping up during All-Star Weekend, Courtney Williams shut it down instantly. She told the live chat, anybody say anything negative about Sophie, put him in timeout. Straight up, we're not doing that. That wasn't just about protecting the teammate, it was about protecting the league's culture, saying we can battle on the court, but we don't tear each other down off it. But then came heavier words. Tasha Cloud took the conversation in the political direction, saying you can't claim to love your peers if your actions, like your vote, don't support their lives. That's weighty. That's bigger than basketball. And it puts Sophie in a spotlight she didn't ask for. Here's the contrast. Sophie isn't about hashtags or purity tests. She's about the grind, about sprinting to the nail, setting the hit on a DHO, calling out coverages, and doing the ugly work that protects her teammates. That's her language, and that's what makes her valuable even in the middle of controversy. Because at the end of the day, the game doesn't wait for debates to resolve. Possessions come every 24 seconds. And Sophie gives you something you can use right now. Edge, energy, and accountability. And if you want to see just how much that matters, listen to Caitlain Clark again, this time in the middle of the storm. In the middle of Indiana's most heated stretch of the season, after all the fouls, all the collisions, all the noise, Sophie Cunningham stepped into the fire. She absorbed it. She wore the contact, the whistles, the criticism. And when Caitlain felt that, her reaction wasn't a speech, wasn't a breakdown. It was one word. Finally. Finally. Someone else taking the heat. Finally. Someone else willing to be the lightning rod who's been targeted all season long. That word reframed everything about Sophie. She wasn't just chaos. She wasn't just irritation. She was cover. She was protection. She was the player who stepped into the storm so her teammate didn't have to. And when your franchise star says finally, the rest of the locker room hears permission. Permission to play with more edge. Permission to lean into the fight. Permission to believe this team can handle anything. So where does that leave Sophie Cunningham? Exactly where her teammates and coaches have been placing her all along. Kelsey Mitchell calls her the wild card. Coach Tibbetts calls her tough. Stephanie White calls her a dog. Paige Buckers shows how her edge tests composure. Courtney Williams protects her. Tasha Cloud challenges her. And Caitlain Clark? She calls her a protector. That's the full picture. She's not just a role player. She's not just a stat line. She's the thermostat of every game she plays. She raises the temperature and dares everyone else to live in it. And in a league where stars get the spotlight, Sophie Cunningham proves that sometimes the most valuable players